Millionaire's son humiliates a Mexican girl at university, but he had no idea who she was, and the ending was shocking. Before you click subscribe to discover more exciting stories like this and avoid 10 years of bad luck in love. The sun rose over New York City, bathing the skyscrapers and old colonial structures alike in its golden light. In a mansion on the outskirts of the city, Valerie Montgomery, an 18-year-old girl, watched the sunrise from the balcony of her room. Her long black hair waved softly in the morning breeze as her hazel eyes reflected an unbreakable determination. Valerie was no ordinary girl. As the sole heiress of the Montgomery Empire, one of the largest fortunes in America, she had grown up surrounded by luxury and privilege. However, in her heart burned a fierce desire to prove herself, to show that she was more than just the last name she carried. "Are you sure about this, my girl?" The voice of Grandma Rose, her grandmother and matriarch of the Montgomery family, interrupted her thoughts. The older woman, with her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, approached Valerie with a mixture of pride and concern on her face. Valerie turned to her grandmother, a determined smile lighting up her features. "Yes, Grandma, I'm completely sure. I need to do this for myself." Grandma Rose sighed but nodded with understanding. "Your father would be proud of you, Valerie. You have his same indomitable spirit." The mention of her father made Valerie's heart clench for a moment. It had only been a year since he had passed away in an accident, leaving her as the sole heiress of the Montgomery Empire. It was then that she made the decision to postpone her entry to university for a year, time she dedicated to learning about the family business and planning her future. "Thank you, Grandma," Valerie replied, hugging the woman who had been her rock during the most difficult times. "I promise I won't disappoint you." "I know you won't, my love, but remember, if at any point you feel it's too much, you can always come home." Valerie nodded, grateful for her grandmother's unconditional support. Then, with a deep sigh, she headed to her closet. She passed by the designer dresses and brand-name shoes, opting instead for simple jeans, a white t-shirt, and sneakers. As she dressed, Valerie mentally reviewed her plan. She would enroll at Harvard University as Valerie Green, a middle-class student who had obtained a scholarship for her excellent grades. She would live in a modest student dorm and work part-time to cover her expenses. No one, absolutely no one, would know that she was the heiress of the Montgomery Empire. "It's time," she said to herself, looking in the mirror one last time. The young woman looking back at her was no longer the Montgomery princess, but an ordinary girl ready to face the world on her own merits. With a small suitcase as her only luggage, Valerie descended the marble stairs of the mansion. In the foyer, the house staff had gathered to say goodbye. Rosa, the housekeeper who had cared for her since she was a child, couldn't contain her tears. "My little Valerie, take care of yourself," Rosa sobbed, hugging her tightly. "I will, Rosa. I promise I'll be fine," Valerie replied, feeling a lump in her throat. After saying goodbye to everyone, Valerie left the mansion instead of the luxurious car with a driver she was used to. A modest taxi awaited her. As the vehicle pulled away down the long driveway of the property, Valerie looked back one last time at what had been her home for 18 years. "Goodbye, life of luxury," she murmured to herself. "Hello, real world." The trip to the city was like a journey through two worlds. They left behind the mansions and exclusive clubs, entering the hustle and bustle of New York City. Valerie observed everything with new eyes, aware that this would be her environment for the next few years. Finally, the taxi stopped in front of an apartment building near the university campus. Valerie paid the driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, observing the multi-story structure that would be her new home. "Here we go," she said to herself, taking a deep breath before entering the building. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. It was small, with a living room, dining room that doubled as a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a basic bathroom. For someone who had grown up in a mansion, it could have been a shock, but Valerie looked at it with a satisfied smile. As she unpacked her few belongings, she heard a knock at the door. Upon opening it, she found a young woman her age, with brown skin and curly hair, smiling widely at her. "Hi, I'm Sophie, your next-door neighbor," The girl introduced herself enthusiastically. "I saw you were moving in and wanted to come say hello. Are you new to the university?" Valerie felt a wave of relief at seeing Sophie's friendly attitude. "Yes, I'm Valerie. It's my first year at Harvard." "Great. I'm in my second year of journalism. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask," Sophie offered. "Thank you, I really appreciate it," Valerie responded sincerely. After chatting a while longer, Sophie said goodbye, leaving Valerie with a feeling of optimism. Her new life was beginning, and although she knew there would be challenges ahead, she was ready to face them. That night, lying in her new and modest bed, Valerie looked out the window at the city lights. "Tomorrow my real test begins," she thought, as sleep slowly overtook her. What Valerie didn't know was that fate had surprises in store for her that would test not only her determination, but also her heart. The first day of classes dawned with a clear sky and a fresh breeze that augured a good start. Valerie woke up early, nervous but excited for what awaited her. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant outfit: jeans, a white blouse, and comfortable shoes. She wanted to fit in, but without completely losing her personal style. As she walked toward campus, Valerie couldn't help but marvel at the diversity of students around her. There were young people from all backgrounds and social classes, united by the common desire to learn and better themselves. For a moment, she felt a twinge of guilt for her deception, but she reminded herself that this was necessary to achieve her objective. Her first class was Introduction to Economics, a subject she had chosen for its relevance to the family business. She entered the classroom and took a seat in one of the middle rows, wanting to go unnoticed but without hiding completely. As the students filled the room, Valerie noticed a group of young people who seemed to stand out from the rest. They wore designer clothes and talked loudly about their vacations in Europe and their luxury cars. Among them, one young man in particular caught her attention. Tall, with perfectly styled brown hair and piercing green eyes, he emanated an aura of confidence and arrogance that was hard to ignore. "That must be Alex Forrester," whispered a girl sitting near Valerie. "They say his family owns half the construction companies in the country." Valerie tensed upon hearing the name. The Forresters were, indeed, one of the most powerful families in America, rivals of the Montgomerys in many respects. She had heard about Alex, but had never met him in person. The class began, and the professor, a middle-aged man with glasses and a graying beard, began to explain the basic concepts of economics. Valerie found herself completely absorbed in the lesson, taking detailed notes and actively participating in the discussion. "Miss," the professor paused, consulting his list. "Green. Excellent analysis of the law of supply and demand. It's clear you've studied the topic." Valerie felt a surge of pride. This was exactly the kind of recognition she sought, based solely on her merits and not on her last name. However, her moment of satisfaction was interrupted by a mocking laugh from the back of the classroom. Alex Forrester was looking at her with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Well, looks like we have a brainiac in the class," he commented loudly, provoking laughter among his group of friends. Valerie felt her cheeks redden, but kept her composure. "Knowledge is not something to mock," she responded calmly, surprising herself with her boldness. The professor intervened before Alex could respond. "Mr. Forrester, I would appreciate you keeping your comments to yourself. We are here to learn, not to belittle others." Alex shrugged indifferently, but Valerie noticed that he was looking at her with a new interest. After class, while Valerie was gathering her things, she felt a presence beside her. It was Alex. "Hey, Brainiac," he said, his voice a mixture of arrogance and curiosity. "Not bad for a scholarship student. Where did you get all that information?" Valerie looked him straight in the eyes, defiant. "I studied, Forrester. You should try it sometime." Alex seemed surprised by her response, but before he could reply, Valerie walked out of the classroom, her heart pounding. She couldn't deny that there was something about Alex that attracted her, but his arrogant attitude repelled her at the same time. The following days were a whirlwind of new experiences for Valerie. She immersed herself in her studies with passion, excelling in all her classes. Little by little, she made friends, especially Sophie, her neighbor, and Charlie, an engineering student from humble origins who impressed her with his intelligence and determination. However, the shadow of Alex Forrester seemed to follow her everywhere. In every class they shared, she felt his gaze upon her, a mixture of irritation and fascination. Despite her attempts to ignore him, Valerie couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement every time their eyes met. One afternoon, while studying in the library, Valerie again found herself with Alex. This time, he seemed different, less arrogant and more vulnerable. "Excuse me," he said, approaching her table. "I was wondering if you could help me with something from the economics class. I didn't quite understand the last topic and, well, you're the best in the class." Valerie looked at him in surprise, searching for any sign of mockery on his face, but only found sincerity. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded. "Okay, sit down," she said, making room at the table. As she explained the concepts he hadn't understood, Valerie was surprised to discover a different side of Alex. Behind his facade of a rich, arrogant boy, there was a sharp and curious mind. "Thanks," Alex said when they finished, his voice softer than usual. "You're different than I thought." "So are you," Valerie replied, feeling a flutter in her stomach. Just when it seemed they were having a moment of connection, Alex's phone rang. Upon seeing the screen, his expression changed, returning to his usual mask of indifference. "I have to go," he said abruptly, gathering his things. "See you in class. Brainiac." Valerie watched him leave, confused by the sudden change. But before she could reflect on what had happened, she noticed that Alex had forgotten one of his books. Without a second thought, she took the book and went after him. She caught up with him in the parking lot here, where he was about to get into a luxurious sports car. "Alex, you forgot this," she called, holding the book. Alex turned, surprised. At that moment, a group of young people, clearly from his same social circle, approached. "Alex, what are you doing talking to the scholarship student?" one of them asked with disdain. Valerie saw how Alex's expression hardened. "Nothing important," he replied, taking the book from Valerie's hands without even looking at her. "She was just begging me to help her with her studies. You know how these poor people are, always looking to take advantage." Alex's words hit Valerie like a slap in the face. She stood paralyzed, unable to believe what she had just heard. Alex's group of friends burst into laughter, looking at her with contempt. "Well, well, the little scholarship girl wants to climb the social ladder," a blonde girl sneered, looking Valerie up and down. "Honey, even if you try for 1,000 years, you could never be at our level." Valerie felt her blood boil. For a moment, she was about to reveal her true identity, to show them that she belonged to a world they could only dream of. But she restrained herself, remembering her purpose. "You're wrong," she said firmly, looking at all of them and stopping on Alex. "I don't need to be at your level. I prefer to maintain my dignity." With those words, she turned and walked away. Her head held high, even though inside she felt like she was falling apart. She didn't see the expression of regret that crossed Alex's face for an instant, nor how he clenched his fists in frustration. That night, in the solitude of her small apartment, Valerie cried for the first time since she had begun her adventure. She didn't cry for the mockery or the contempt, but for the disappointment. For a moment, she had believed she saw something different in Alex, something genuine. Now she realized how naive she had been. "I won't make that mistake again," she promised herself, wiping away her tears with determination. The following days were difficult. Rumors about the incident in the parking lot had spread, and Valerie could feel the stares and whispers around her. However, she remained firm, focusing on her studies and the friends who truly appreciated her. Sophie and Charlie became her unconditional support. One afternoon, while studying together in the campus cafeteria, Charlie couldn't contain his indignation any longer. "I don't understand how you can be so calm, Val," he said, frowning. "Those rich kids think they have the right to treat everyone like trash." Valerie smiled sadly. "I'm not calm, Charlie, but I'm not going to let it affect me. I'm here for a purpose, and nothing and no one is going to stop me from achieving it." Sophie looked at her with admiration. "You're amazing, you know. Anyone else would have given up by now." At that moment, Valerie noticed Alex entering the cafeteria. Their eyes met for an instant, and she could see a mixture of emotions in his eyes: regret, confusion, and something else she couldn't identify. But he quickly looked away, determined not to fall back into his game. What Valerie didn't know was that her attitude was having a profound effect on Alex. The young heir couldn't get the image of Valerie walking away with dignity after his cruel joke out of his head. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely ashamed of his actions. One afternoon, while Valerie was leaving her part-time job at the campus bookstore, she found herself face to face with Alex. The young man looked nervous, very different from his usual arrogance. "Valerie," he said, his voice almost a whisper. I wanted to apologize for what happened. My behavior was inexcusable." She looked at him warily, not knowing whether to believe his words. "Why should I care about your apology, Alex? You made it very clear what you think of me and people like me." Alex ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I know, and I regret it. It's just that my whole life I've been surrounded by people who expect me to act a certain way. When I'm with you, I feel like I can be different, be myself, but then I chicken out and put that mask back on." Valerie felt her heart race. A part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to see the best in him, but another part, the part that had been hurt, kept her cautious. "Words are easy, Alex," she finally responded. "It's actions that show who you really are." Before Alex could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Alex, what are you doing talking to her again?" Valerie turned to see a young man approaching. He was remarkably similar to Alex, but there was something different in his gaze, a warmth that contrasted with Alex's usual coldness. "Matthew," said Alex, visibly tensing. "I was just apologizing, I hope." Matthew interrupted, looking at his brother with disapproval. Then he turned to Valerie with a kind smile. "I'm Matthew Forrester, this idiot's younger brother. I'm so sorry about what happened the other day. I assure you that not everyone in our family is like that." Valerie found herself instantly captivated by the sincerity in Matthew's eyes. "Thank you," she replied, feeling herself blush slightly. "I'm Valerie Green." Matthew took her hand and kissed it gently, an old-fashioned but charming gesture. "A pleasure to meet you, Valerie. I hope you'll give us the chance to prove that not all Forresters are insufferable snobs." Alex watched the exchange with a mixture of emotions on his face. On the one hand, he felt relieved that his brother was treating Valerie well. On the other, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy. "Well, I have to go," said Valerie, suddenly feeling uncomfortable with the intensity of both brothers' gazes. "Thanks for the apology, Alex, and it was a pleasure to meet you, Matthew." As she walked away, Valerie couldn't help but think about how different the Forrester brothers were. Alex was with his arrogance and internal struggle, and Matthew with his seemingly genuine warmth and kindness. What she didn't know was that this encounter would mark the beginning of a love triangle that would test not only her feelings, but also her values and her determination to keep her true identity a secret. The days following the encounter with the Forrester brothers were an emotional whirlwind for Valerie. On the one hand, she couldn't help but feel attracted to Matthew's warmth and sincerity. On the other, the image of Alex, with his mixture of arrogance and vulnerability, kept haunting her thoughts. One morning, while walking to her advanced economics class, Valerie ran into Matthew in the hallway. The young man smiled widely at her, his eyes lighting up upon seeing her. "Valerie, what a coincidence to find you here," said Matthew, approaching. "I was thinking, would you like to have coffee with me after classes? I know an incredible place near campus." Valerie felt a flutter in her stomach. Matthew's invitation was tempting, and a part of her longed to get to know him better. However, the caution she had developed since beginning her plan made her hesitate. "I don't know, Matthew," she replied, biting her lip. "I have a lot of studying to do and—" "Come on. An hour isn't going to ruin your perfect GPA," Matthew insisted with a charming smile. "Besides, we could study together if you want. I'm pretty good at economics, although not as much as you, from what I've heard." Finally, far from the hustle and bustle of campus, Valerie found herself laughing at Matthew's anecdotes and fascinated by his passion for volunteering and social causes. "You know, my family doesn't understand why I care so much about these things," Matthew confessed, his expression turning serious for a moment. "For them, money and status are everything, but I believe we have a responsibility to those who have less." Valerie felt a deep connection with Matthew's words. It was exactly what she believed, what had led her to undertake this adventure in the first place. "It's admirable that you think that way," she said, looking at him with new eyes. "Not many people in your position care about others." Matthew looked at her intensely. "You do. I've seen how you treat everyone equally, how you help your classmates without expecting anything in return. That's what attracted me to you from the beginning." Valerie felt herself blush. For a moment, she was tempted to tell him the truth about her identity, to share with him her vision and her dreams. But she restrained herself, reminding herself that she still couldn't fully trust anyone. Meanwhile, at the Forrester mansion, Alex was in his room, unable to concentrate on his studies. The image of Valerie and Matthew together tormented him. Why did it affect him so much? She was just a scholarship girl, someone he shouldn't even notice, according to the unwritten rules of his social circle. But Valerie was different. Her intelligence, her dignity, the way she challenged him. Everything about her fascinated and frustrated him at the same time. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was his father, Ernest Forrester, an imposing man whose mere presence filled the room. "Alex, we need to talk," said Ernest, his voice deep and serious. "I've noticed that you've been distracted lately. I hope it's not because of that scholarship girl I've been told about." Alex tensed. "I don't know what you're talking about, Dad." Ernest looked at him sternly. "You know very well what I'm talking about. The Forresters have a reputation to maintain. You can't go around mixing with just anyone. You have a bright future ahead of you. Don't ruin it for a whim." His father's words echoed in Alex's mind long after he left. He had always sought Ernest's approval, always tried to be the perfect son. But now, for the first time, he felt that maybe the cost of that approval was too high. The following days were an emotional whirlwind for the three young people. Matthew continued to get close to Valerie, inviting her to study together and sharing with her his volunteer projects. Valerie found herself increasingly attracted to his kindness and his worldview. Alex, for his part, struggled against his growing feelings for Valerie and his family's expectations. Every time he saw her in class, he felt a mixture of longing and frustration. He wanted to approach her, apologize again, show her that he could be better, but the fear of rejection and disappointing his family paralyzed him. One afternoon, while Valerie was leaving the library, she found herself face to face with Alex. The young man seemed agitated. "To have people like you." Valerie's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she saw the real Alex, the one hiding behind the mask of arrogance, and what she saw moved her deeply. But before she could respond, a familiar voice interrupted them. "Val, there you are!" It was Matthew, approaching with a smile. His expression changed upon seeing his brother. "Alex, what are you doing here?" The tension between the brothers was palpable. Valerie found herself caught between the two, feeling the weight of both their gazes. "We were just talking," said Valerie, trying to ease the tension. "Alex was telling me about a project from the economics class." Matthew didn't seem convinced, but nodded. "Well, ready to go. Remember you promised to help me with the fundraiser for the orphanage." Valerie nodded, grateful for the distraction. As she walked away with Matthew, she couldn't help but look back. The expression of pain on Alex's face would haunt her for days. That night, in the solitude of her small apartment, Valerie found herself reflecting on the Forrester brothers. Matthew, with his kindness and social commitment, represented everything she valued. But Alex, with his internal struggle and his desire to change, awakened feelings in her that she couldn't ignore. She felt divided, not only between two brothers, but between two versions of herself, the Valerie Green she had created, and the true Valerie Montgomery hiding behind the facade. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and events. Valerie immersed herself in her studies and volunteer work with Matthew, trying to quiet the confusion in her heart. Together, they organized a series of fundraising events that not only raised money for important causes, but also brought Valerie closer to the reality of many less fortunate people. One afternoon, while painting the walls of a community center in a marginalized neighborhood, Matthew stopped and looked at Valerie intently. "You know, I've never met anyone like you," he said, his voice soft but charged with emotion. "You're intelligent, compassionate, hard-working. You make me want to be a better person." Valerie felt her heart race. The sincerity in Matthew's eyes was undeniable, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life with him, a life dedicated to doing good and making a difference in the world. "Matthew, she began, but was interrupted by the sound of her phone. It was a message from her grandmother, reminding her of an important board meeting for the Montgomery companies. The reality of her double life hit her hard. "I'm sorry, I have to go," she said hastily, gathering her things. "It's a family emergency." Matthew looked at her with concern. "Is everything okay? Can I help you with anything?" "No, don't worry," Valerie replied, feeling the weight of her lie. "It's just complicated." As she walked away, Valerie couldn't help but feel like she was running not only from Matthew, but also from the life she could have if she were truly Valerie Green. That night, after the meeting, Valerie found herself walking aimlessly through the streets of the city. Her steps led her, almost unconsciously, towards the university campus. As she passed the library, a solitary figure caught her attention. It was Alex, sitting on the front steps, his head in his hands. He looked dejected, vulnerable in a way Valerie had never seen before. Something inside her drove her to approach. "Alex, are you okay?" The young man looked up, surprised. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying. "Valerie, what are you doing here so late?" "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, sitting down beside him. Alex was silent for a moment, as if he were struggling internally. Finally, he spoke. "My father. He wants me to leave the university and take over one of the family businesses. He says I've played at being a student long enough." Valerie felt a twinge of empathy. She knew well the pressure of family expectations. "Duncan, what do you want?" "I don't know," Alex confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "All my life I've tried to be what my father wants me to be, the perfect heir, the model son. But when I'm here, when I'm with you, I feel like I can be someone else, someone better." Their eyes met, and Valerie felt the world around her disappear. At that moment, they weren't Valerie Green, the scholarship student, and Alex Forrester, the arrogant heir. They were just two people, connected by their internal struggles and their desires to be authentic. Without thinking, Valerie took Alex's hand. "I think you're already someone better, Alex. You just need to believe it yourself." Alex looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that made Valerie's heart race. Slowly, as if asking permission, he leaned towards her. Their lips were about to touch when the sound of footsteps startled them. They quickly separated, just in time to see Matthew approaching. "Val, Alex?" The confusion and pain in Matthew's voice were evident. "What's going on here?" Valerie jumped to her feet, feeling guilty even though she had done nothing wrong. "Matthew, it's not what it looks like. We were just talking." But Matthew was already walking away, the disappointment clear on his face. Valerie found herself divided between going after him or staying with Alex. "Go," said Alex softly. "He needs you more than I do right now." With one last glance at Alex, Valerie ran after Matthew, her mind a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. She caught up with him in the parking lot. "Matthew, please, wait. Let me explain." Matthew stopped, but didn't turn to look at her. "What is there to explain, Valerie? I thought we had something special. I thought we shared the same values, the same dreams." "And we do," Valerie insisted. "What you saw was nothing." Running a hand through his hair in frustration, "Alex, he's always had everything he wanted, and when he gets it, he gets bored and discards it. I don't want you to be just another whim for him." Matthew's words resonated in Valerie's mind. mixing with her own doubts and fears. What if he was right? What if Alex was just playing with her? But then she remembered the vulnerability in Alex's eyes, the sincerity in his voice when he talked about wanting to be better. No, she told herself. There was something more there. I appreciate your concern, Matthew, she said finally, but I think you're being unfair to Alex. People can change, can grow, and I think that's what he's trying to do. Matthew looked at her for a long moment, as if he were seeing something new in her. You really see the best in everyone, don't you? His voice was a mixture of admiration and resignation. That's one of the things I like most about you. But I also fear it could hurt you. Valerie felt a wave of affection for Matthew. His kindness, his genuine concern were qualities she deeply admired. But she also realized that, as much as she appreciated him, what she felt for him wasn't the same as the whirlwind of emotions that Alex awakened in her. Matthew, she began, choosing her words carefully, you're an incredible person. Your compassion, your dedication to helping others are qualities I admire greatly. But I think I need time to sort out my feelings. I don't want to hurt either you or Alex. Matthew nodded slowly, the sadness evident in his eyes, but also a resigned understanding. I understand, and I respect your honesty. Just promise me you'll be careful, okay? Valerie nodded, feeling grateful for his understanding, but also guilty for the pain she saw on his face. As Matthew walked away, Valerie stood there, in the middle of the empty parking lot, feeling that her life had become more complicated than she ever imagined. That night, back in her small apartment, Valerie found herself facing an identity crisis. Who was she really? The heiress Valerie Montgomery, with all the weight of family expectations on her shoulders, or the scholarship student Valerie Green, struggling to get ahead on her own merits? And in the midst of all this, how did Alex and Matthew fit in? Two brothers, so different and yet so similar, each awakening deep but distinct feelings in her. As she looked out the window at the city lights, Valerie realized she had reached a turning point. The decisions she made in the coming days would not only affect her future, but also those around her. With a sigh, she took out her phone and dialed a familiar number. After several rings, a warm voice answered. "Grandma, I need your advice." The next morning dawned grey and rainy, as if the weather reflected Valerie's emotional turmoil. After a night of insomnia and a long conversation with her grandmother, she had made a decision. It was time to reveal her true identity. Grandma Rose's wisdom echoed in her mind. "My girl, you've proven your worth beyond any doubt. But true courage is in being authentic, in facing the consequences of the truth." With a determined step, the Forrester brothers were already there, sitting at separate tables, the tension between them palpable. "Thanks for coming," said Valerie, taking a seat between them. "There's something important I need to tell you both." Alex and Matthew exchanged a look of confusion before focusing their attention on her. Valerie took a deep breath. "My name isn't Valerie Green. I'm Valerie Montgomery, heiress of the Montgomery Group." The silence that followed her declaration was deafening. Alex looked at her with a mixture of shock and disbelief, while Matthew seemed to be processing the information, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Montgomery, as in Montgomery Industries?" Alex finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Valerie nodded. "Yes, I came to the university under a false identity because I wanted to prove my worth on my own merits, without the weight of my last name." Matthew was the first to break the silence that followed. "So it was all a lie," he said, his voice laden with disappointment. "The scholarship girl struggling to get ahead, your job at the bookstore, your need to save every penny." "No, Matthew," Valerie interrupted, her voice pleading. "My circumstances were false, but everything else, my values, my feelings, my desire to help, all of that is real." Alex, who had remained silent, let out a bitter laugh. "What irony. Me treating you with contempt for being inferior, when in reality you're part of one of the most powerful families in the country. Alex, No, let me finish," he interrupted, his voice mixing anger and something deeper, something that sounded dangerously close to pain. "You made me feel like an idiot, Valerie. You made me question everything I believed, feel guilty for how I had treated you. And all the time you were someone who wanted to be valued for who she is, not what she has," Matthew completed, surprising them both. His voice was soft, understanding. "I can understand that." Valerie felt a wave of gratitude towards Matthew. "Thank you for understanding. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted the opportunity to be myself, without expectations or prejudice." Alex abruptly stood up. "I need time to process this," he said, his voice tense. I can't be here right now." Before Valerie could stop him, Alex left the cafe, leaving her with a lump in her throat and a weight in her heart. Matthew looked at her with a mixture of understanding and sadness. "It'll take him time, but he'll understand, Alex. He's always struggled with our family's expectations. I think deep down, he envies you for having had the courage to escape them, even if temporarily." Valerie nodded, grateful for Matthew's perspective. "And you, can you forgive me for deceiving you?" Matthew was silent for a moment, considering his words. "Valerie, what attracted me to you wasn't your supposed economic situation or your background. It was your compassion, your intelligence, your desire to make the world a better place. That hasn't changed, has it?" Valerie felt her eyes fill with tears. "No, that will never change. It's who I really am, with or without the Montgomery last name." Matthew took her hand gently. "Then there's nothing to forgive. I understand why you did it, and I admire your courage to be true to yourself." The gratitude Valerie felt at that moment was overwhelming. Without thinking, she leaned in and hugged Matthew tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means to me." When they separated, Matthew looked at her with a mixture of affection and resignation. "You know, I always knew there was something special about you, something that went beyond being a simple scholarship student. Now I understand what it was." Valerie felt a twinge of guilt. "Matthew, He raised a hand to stop her. "You don't have to say anything. I've seen how you look at Alex and how he looks at you. Maybe I always knew it, but didn't want to admit it." "I'm sorry," said Valerie softly. "Joyce, I never meant to hurt you." "I know," Matthew replied with a sad smile. "And it's okay. Sometimes love isn't enough. It takes something more, a deeper connection. And I think you and Alex have that, even if you're both too stubborn to admit it." Valerie was left speechless by Matthew's generosity and understanding. At that moment, she realized that, though it wasn't romantic love, what she felt for him was a deep affection and respect. "You're an incredible person, Matthew Forrester," she said finally. "Whoever wins your heart will be very lucky." Matthew smiled, this time with more joy. "Thank you. And now, what do you plan to do?" Valerie sighed, the reality of her situation falling upon her again. "I guess I have to face the consequences of my actions, talk to my classmates, to the professors, and to Alex." "It won't be easy," Matthew warned, "especially with Alex. He's not very good at dealing with his emotions, and this has surely shaken him to the core." Valerie nodded, remembering the hurt look in Alex's eyes when he left the cafe. "I know, but I have to try. I owe him at least that." Matthew looked at her with admiration. "You know, I think you're exactly what Alex needs in his life, someone to challenge him, make him question himself and want to be better." "If he ever speaks to me again," Valerie murmured. "He will," Matthew assured. "Just give him time. And when he does, don't let his pride or his fear push you away. Alex can be stubborn, but his heart is in the right place. He just needs someone to help him find it." With those words of encouragement, Valerie said goodbye to Matthew, feeling grateful for his understanding but also anxious for what was to come. The path ahead of her wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to face it with the same strength and dignity that had brought her this far. The following days were a whirlwind for Valerie. The news of her true identity spread quickly across campus, generating a mixture of reactions. Some admired her for her courage and determination, others criticized her for her deception. Her closest friends, like Sophie and Charlie, although initially surprised and hurt, eventually understood her motives and offered their support. However, the reaction that mattered most to Valerie remained a mystery. Alex seemed to have vanished. He didn't attend classes, didn't respond to messages, and according to Matthew, barely left his room at the Forrester mansion. One afternoon, while Valerie was walking through campus, lost in thought, a familiar voice pulled her out of her reverie. "Miss Montgomery, do you have a moment?" It was Professor Ramirez, her mentor in the economics department. Valerie felt a knot in her stomach. Although the dean had agreed to keep her situation private, she knew she would eventually have to face her professors. "Of course, Professor," she replied, following him to his office. Once inside, Professor Ramirez looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and curiosity. "I must admit, Miss Montgomery, that your revelation took me by surprise. It's not every day you discover that your most brilliant student is actually the heiress of one of the most important conglomerates in the country." Valerie lowered her gaze, ashamed. "Professor, I'm not finished," he interrupted, raising a hand. "What you did was ethically questionable, no doubt. But as an educator, I can't help but admire your dedication and your desire to prove yourself." Valerie looked up, surprised. "You're not angry?" Professor Ramirez smiled slightly. "Angry, no, disappointed, perhaps, that you didn't trust us, but primarily, I'm intrigued. What led you to make such a drastic decision?" And so, Valerie found herself sharing her story with the professor. She told him about her desire to be valued for her own merits, her frustration with the expectations that came with her last name, her longing to make a real difference in the world. When she finished, Professor Ramirez looked at her with a new understanding in his eyes. "Miss Montgomery, Valerie, what you did was risky and, in many ways, problematic, but I can't deny that your intentions were noble, and your achievements, both academic and personal, are entirely your own." "Thank you, Professor," said Valerie, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "However," he continued, his tone becoming more serious, "you now face a new challenge. You've proven your worth as a student. Now you must demonstrate your integrity as a person. How do you plan to use your position and your skills to make that difference you long for?" The question hit Valerie hard. It was true. She had achieved her initial goal of proving herself. But what came next? I'm not sure," she admitted. "But I know I want to use my education and my position to help others, to create opportunities for those who don't have them." Professor Ramirez nodded with approval. "That's a noble objective, and I think you're in a unique position to achieve it. Not many heirs of great fortunes have the perspective you've gained from this experience." Valerie felt a spark of inspiration at her mentor's words. Maybe, she thought, this wasn't the end of her journey, but just the beginning of something bigger. As she left Professor Ramirez's office, Valerie felt lighter, more focused. She had a renewed purpose, a clearer vision of what she wanted to achieve. However, her moment of clarity was abruptly interrupted when, turning a corner, she found herself face to face with Alex. The young man looked at her with a mixture of emotions on his face: surprise, pain, anger, and something else that Valerie couldn't decipher. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to say something, but then he simply shook his head and brushed past her, his shoulder grazing hers. "Alex, wait," Valerie called, her heart pounding, but he didn't stop, walking away quickly. Valerie stood there, in the middle of the hallway, watching as Alex's figure disappeared into the crowd of students. She knew she had a long way to go to rebuild the trust she had lost, especially with him. But she also knew she wouldn't give up. Not now. When she had finally found her true purpose, with a new determination in her gaze, Valerie headed towards her next class. The future was uncertain, but she was ready to face it, without masks or pretenses, simply as herself. Valerie Montgomery, a young woman with a dream and the will to make it a reality. The following weeks were a period of adjustment for Valerie. Although the initial storm of her revelation had passed, she still felt the aftershocks in her daily life. The whispers and stares in the university hallways were a constant reminder that her world had changed irrevocably. However, Valerie was determined not to let this define her. With the guidance of Professor Ramirez and the unconditional support of Matthew, she began to work on a project that combined her economic studies with her desire to make a real difference in society. One afternoon, while working in the library on her proposal for a microcredit program for small entrepreneurs in marginalized communities, Valerie felt a familiar presence beside her. She looked up to find Alex's green eyes. "Can I sit down?" he asked, his voice neutral but with a slight tremor that betrayed his nervousness. Valerie nodded, her heart racing. It was the first time Alex had spoken to her since her revelation. "I've been thinking a lot," Alex began, his gaze fixed on the table. "About you, about me, about everything that's happened." Valerie held her breath, waiting. "At first I was furious," he continued. "I felt you had deceived me, that you had mocked me. But then, talking to Matthew and, well, doing a lot of introspection, I realized something." Finally, Alex looked up, his eyes meeting Valerie's. "I realized that, deep down, I was jealous. Jealous of your courage to do what I've always wanted to do, escape expectations, be valued for who I am, not for my last name." Valerie felt her eyes fill with tears. "Alex, No, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "What you did was risky and, in many ways, questionable, but it was also brave, and it made me realize that I can be brave too, that I can choose my own path." "What do you mean?" asked Valerie, intrigued. Alex took a deep breath. "I've decided to leave the business administration program. I'm going to study environmental law. I want to use my family's resources to do something good, to protect the environment and the communities affected by uncontrolled industrialization." Valerie looked at him with astonishment and pride. "Alex, that's incredible. How did your father take it?" An ironic smile crossed Alex's face. "Let's just say he's not exactly thrilled. But for the first time in my life, I don't care about his approval. I'm doing this for me because it's the right thing to do." At that moment, Valerie saw the real Alex. The man she had always known existed behind the facade of arrogance. Without thinking, she took his hand. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "And if you need help or support, I'll always be here." Alex squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you, Valerie. And I wanted to apologize for how I treated you at the beginning, for my behavior after your revelation. I wasn't fair to you." "We both made mistakes," Valerie replied. "The important thing is that we learned from them." They looked at each other for a long moment, years of misunderstandings and prejudices dissolving in an instant of mutual understanding. "So," said Alex finally, a genuine smile lighting up his face, "how about we start over? Hi, I'm Alex Forrester, future environmental lawyer and recovering spoiled brat." Valerie laughed, feeling a wave of affection for him. "Nice to meet you, Alex. I'm Valerie Montgomery, economics student and former undercover heiress." As they laughed together, Valerie felt a new chapter opening in her life, one filled with possibilities, second chances, and the promise of a better future. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Valerie, with the support of Alex and Matthew, launched her microcredit program. Using the resources of the Montgomery Foundation and the Forresters' contacts, they managed to create a significant impact in several marginalized communities. Alex, for his part, immersed himself in his new studies with a passion that surprised everyone who knew him. His transformation from carefree playboy to passionate environmental advocate was the talk of the Mexican elite social circles. Matthew, always the kind-hearted one, became the bridge between his family's business world and the social initiatives of Valerie and Alex. His ability to navigate both worlds proved invaluable to the success of their projects. One afternoon, while the three worked in the office they had established for their joint foundation, Valerie couldn't help but reflect on how much their lives had changed in such a short time. "You know, sometimes I can't believe how far we've come," said Valerie. Looking at Alex and Matthew with affection, Alex looked up from the legal documents he was reviewing, a playful smile on his lips. "Are you referring to how we went from being a dysfunctional trio to the three musketeers of social change?" Matthew laughed, shaking his head. "I think what Valerie means is that we've grown, all of us." Valerie nodded, grateful for Matthew's understanding. "Exactly. A year ago, I never would have imagined we'd be here, working together to make a real difference in the world." And all thanks to your little secret identity adventure, Alex joked, but the affection in his voice was evident. Well, not all thanks to me, Valerie replied humbly. You two also made brave decisions. Especially you, Alex. Facing your father couldn't have been easy. Alex's expression turned serious for a moment. No, it wasn't, but it was worth it. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something meaningful, something I can be proud of. Matthew put a hand on his brother's shoulder. And we are, Alex. We're all proud of you. The moment of camaraderie was interrupted by the sound of Valerie's phone. Upon seeing the name on the screen, her expression changed. It's my grandmother, she said, a touch of concern in her voice. I have to take this. As Valerie left the office to take the call, Alex and Matthew exchanged looks of unease. They knew Valerie's relationships with her family, especially with the Montgomery Group Board of Directors, had been strained since she decided to devote more time to her social projects than to the family business. When Valerie returned, her face was pale. What's wrong? Alex asked, getting up immediately to go to her side. It's my grandfather, Valerie replied, her voice barely a whisper. He had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. Without saying another word, Alex and Matthew began to gather their things. It went without saying. They would go with her to the hospital, no matter what. The trip to the hospital was tense and silent. Valerie stared out the car window, lost in her thoughts. Alex, who was driving, gave her worried glances through the rearview mirror, while Matthew, from the passenger seat, tried to maintain a light conversation to distract her. Upon arriving at the hospital, they found Grandma Rose in the waiting room. The Montgomery matriarch, always so strong and composed, seemed to have aged 10 years in a few hours. Grandma, Valerie called softly, running to hug her. Grandma Rose received her in her arms, her voice trembling but full of affection. My girl, how good that you're here. Alex and Matthew kept a respectful distance, but Grandma Rose noticed them immediately. I see you've brought support, she commented, a slight smile on her lips despite the situation. I'm glad to see you have good friends, Valerie. They're more than friends, Grandma, Valerie replied, taking Alex's hand while Matthew approached her other side. They're my family too. Grandma Rose nodded with approval. I'm glad to hear that. Your grandfather always said that true wealth is in the relationships we build. The mention of her grandfather made Valerie tense. How is he? What have the doctors said? Grandma Rose's face darkened. He's stable, but critical. The doctors say the next 24 hours will be crucial. Valerie felt her legs weaken, but Alex held her firmly. Matthew, always practical, approached the reception desk to obtain more information. The hours that followed were an agony of waiting and uncertainty. Valerie refused to leave the hospital, and Alex and Matthew took turns bringing her coffee and making sure she ate something. It was during one of these night vigils that Valerie, exhausted and vulnerable, finally broke down. I can't lose him, she sobbed on Alex's shoulder. There's so much I haven't told him yet, so much I want him to see. Alex hugged her tightly, his own eyes wet. He's a strong man, Val, and he has a lot to fight for you, for your grandmother, for everything you've achieved. Matthew, who was returning with coffee for everyone, joined the hug. We're here with you, Val. No matter what happens, you're not alone. It was in that moment, surrounded by the love and support of Alex and Matthew, that Valerie realized a fundamental truth. Family isn't always just the one we're born into, but also the one we choose. The morning brought hopeful news. Valerie's grandfather had made it through the night and was showing signs of improvement. When they were finally able to see him, Valerie entered the hospital room with her heart in her throat. Grandpa, she called softly, approaching the bed. The old man opened his eyes slowly, a weak but warm smile lighting up his face. My little Valerie, he whispered. I knew you'd come. Valerie took his hand, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Of course I came. How could I not? I've heard about your work, Grandfather said, his voice weak but full of pride. You're doing wonderful things, my girl. Things I always wanted to do, but never had the courage. Valerie felt her heart swell with emotion. Everything I know, I learned from you and Grandma. You taught me the importance of using our resources to help others. Grandfather nodded weakly. And you're doing it better than we ever imagined. I'm so proud of you, Valerie. so proud. His eyes began to close, fatigue overtaking him, but before falling into a restful sleep, he murmured, "Those young men, the Forresters, they're good boys. Don't let them go, you hear?" Valerie laughed softly through her tears. "I won't, Grandpa, I promise." When she left the room, Alex and Matthew were waiting for her. Without a word, the three melted into an embrace, the relief and gratitude palpable between them. "Thank you," Valerie whispered, "for being here, for everything." "Always," Alex replied, softly kissing her forehead. Matthew smiled, his usual comforting warmth. "We're a team, remember, in good times and bad." As they left the hospital, the dawn sun bathed the city in a golden light. Valerie looked at Alex and Matthew, feeling a wave of affection and gratitude. They had been through so much together, had grown and changed in ways they never imagined. And although the road ahead still had challenges, Valerie knew that, with them by her side, she could face anything. Because in the end, she had discovered that true wealth wasn't in her last name or her bank account, but in the bonds she had forged, in the love she had found, and in the difference she was making in the world. With a smile, Valerie interlaced her fingers with Alex's and rested her head on Matthew's shoulder. Together, they walked towards the future, ready to face whatever came as the family they had chosen to be. The following months were a period of intense work and growth for Valerie, Alex, and Matthew. Their foundation, now known as Bright Future, was gaining recognition for its innovative community development and environmental conservation programs. One sunny morning, as the three discussed their upcoming projects in the office, they received news that would change the course of their lives. "You won't believe this," exclaimed Matthew, bursting into the meeting room with his laptop. "They just announced the finalists for the National Social Innovation Award, and we're among them." Valerie and Alex looked at each other in astonishment before bursting into shouts of joy. The National Social Innovation Award was one of the most prestigious recognitions in the country in the field of sustainable development and corporate social responsibility. "Are you serious?" asked Valerie, her voice trembling with emotion. "Our microcredit and training program for women entrepreneurs," Matthew nodded, his smile so wide it seemed his face would split in two. "Exactly. They say it's one of the most promising projects they've seen in years." Alex, always the most pragmatic of the group, was already thinking about the next steps. "This is amazing, guys, but now comes the hard part. We have to prepare a presentation that will dazzle the jury." The three immersed themselves in a frenzy of preparations. Days and nights blended as they perfected their presentation, collected testimonials from the women benefited by their program, and fine-tuned every detail of their proposal to expand the project nationally. However, as the date of the final presentation approached, a shadow began to loom over their success. Rumors started to circulate in the media, insinuating that the success of Bright Future was due more to Valerie and the Forrester brothers' family connections than to the real merits of their work. One afternoon, while Valerie was reviewing the latest impact figures of their project, Alex entered her office, his face tense. "Val, we have a problem," he said, showing her his tablet. On the screen, a striking headline proclaimed, "Merit or Nepotism? The Truth Behind the Success of Bright Future." Valerie felt her stomach churn as she read the article. The accusations were unfounded, but the potential damage to their reputation was undeniable. "This is a disaster," she murmured, burying her face in her hands. "All our work, everything we've achieved." Alex knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Hey, look at me," he said softly. "We knew something like this might happen. People always seek to discredit what they don't understand or what makes them feel threatened." Valerie looked up, meeting Alex's determined eyes. "What are we going to do?" "What we always do," he replied with a defiant smile. "Face it head on, with the truth as our most powerful weapon." At that moment, Matthew entered the office, his face serious but resolute. "Guys, I just saw the news. I think I have an idea." The three gathered around the conference table, listening intently as Matthew laid out his plan. It was risky, but if it worked, it would not only dispel doubts about their work, but also amplify the impact of their message. The days leading up to the final presentation were a roller coaster of emotions. Valerie, Alex, and Matthew worked tirelessly, adjusting their strategy and preparing for any eventuality. Finally, the big day arrived. The auditorium was filled with business leaders, government officials, and representatives from social organizations. The air was charged with expectation. When the presenter announced "Bright Future's turn," Valerie felt her heart race. Taking a deep breath, she took the stage flanked by Alex and Matthew. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice firm despite her nerves. "We are here today not only to present a project, but to share a vision. A vision of an America where every person, regardless of their background or circumstances, has the opportunity to build a better future." As she spoke, images and testimonials of the women benefited by their program were projected on the screen behind her. Faces full of hope and determination, stories of overcoming and success. "Much has been said about us in recent days," Valerie continued, her voice gaining strength. "The legitimacy of our work has been questioned. It has been insinuated that our success is due more to our last names than to our efforts." A murmur ran through the audience. Valerie paused, her eyes scanning the room. "But today, we are not here to defend ourselves. We are here to let our work speak for itself." With a gesture, Matthew activated a live broadcast. On the screen appeared dozens of women, all beneficiaries of their program, connected from different parts of the country. "These are the true protagonists of our story," said Alex, taking the microphone. "Brave women who, with a little support and a lot of determination, are transforming their communities." One by one, the women shared their stories. They spoke of how the microcredit program had allowed them to start their own businesses, how the training had given them the tools to grow and prosper. The audience listened in silence, clearly moved by the testimonials. Valerie felt her heart swell with pride and gratitude. "This is what really matters," she said, her voice charged with emotion. "Not the sensational headlines, not the speculation about our motives. What matters are the lives we are helping to change, the communities we are helping to strengthen." Matthew stepped forward, completing the presentation with concrete data on the economic and social impact of the program. The figures were impressive. Hundreds of new jobs created, loan repayment rates close to 98%, a significant increase in the household incomes of the participants. When they finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Valerie, Alex, and Matthew held hands, overwhelmed by the response. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. When they finally announced the winner of the National Social Innovation Award, the three held their breath. And the winner is Bright Future for their Economic Empowerment Program for Women. The explosion of joy was instantaneous. Valerie felt tears running down her cheeks as she hugged Alex and Matthew. They had done it. They had faced the doubts, the criticisms, the challenges, and they had triumphed. On stage, surrounded by flashes and applause, Valerie took the microphone once more. "This award isn't just ours," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It belongs to every woman who trusted in our program, to every community that opened its doors to us, to every person who believed in our vision of a more just and equitable America." She looked at Alex and Matthew, her eyes shining with affection and gratitude. "And it belongs to these two wonderful men who have been my support, my inspiration, and my chosen family on this journey." Alex pulled her towards him, kissing her softly on the lips, while Matthew embraced them both, his smile as bright as the stage lights. In that moment, surrounded by love, success, and the promise of a bright future, Valerie knew she had found her true purpose. She was no longer the hidden heiress, trying to prove her worth. She was Valerie Montgomery, a strong woman, capable of creating positive change in the world, surrounded by people who loved her for who she truly was. 5 years later, Valerie found herself on the terrace of the new headquarters of Bright Future, watching the sunset over New York City. The building, a modern complex that combined offices, training spaces, and a business incubator, was a testament to the growth and success of their organization. Behind her, she heard familiar footsteps. Alex approached, wrapping his arms around her waist, and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about, love?" he asked softly. Valerie smiled, leaning back against him. "About how much everything has changed, about how far we've come." And certainly, they had come far. Bright Future now operated throughout the United States and was expanding its programs to other countries in the Americas. Alex had finished his degree in environmental law and now led the organization's sustainability division. Matthew D., always the heart of the team, directed community relations and volunteer programs. "Sometimes I still can't believe it all started with my crazy idea to hide my identity," Valerie laughed. Alex turned her to look into her eyes, his expression serious but full of love. "Maybe it started that way, but what we built afterwards, that was real. That was us, being authentic, following our hearts." At that moment, the terrace door opened and Matthew came out, holding a 2-year-old girl in his arms. "Mommy! Daddy!" the little one shouted, extending her little arms. Valerie took her in her arms, covering her little face with kisses. "Have you been behaving for Uncle Matthew, Rose?" The girl nodded fervently, her dark curls bouncing. She had been named in honor of Valerie's grandmother, who now enjoyed her role as great-grandmother with joy and pride. Matthew smiled, tousling the little girl's hair. "She's an angel, as always, although I think soon we'll have to hire her. With all the ideas she has to help in the office." They all laughed, the sound of their joy mixing with the bustle of the city below. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Valerie looked around, her husband, her best friend, her daughter, the city she loved, the work she was passionate about. She had found her place in the world, her purpose. She was no longer the hidden heiress, trying to prove her worth. She was simply Valerie, a woman who had learned that true wealth was in love, authenticity, and service to others. With a smile, she hugged her family, grateful for the journey that had brought her there, and excited for the chapters yet to be written in her story.